I'm Sophia Brown, 36 years old. This isn't just the story of me getting fired. It's the story of how I turned my downfall into the spark of revenge. For 12 years, I gave everything to a Miami real estate empire: my youth, my trust, my reputation. And in a single meeting, Richard Thorne, the arrogant, incompetent CEO, crushed it all. He painted me as a traitor, tore my career to shreds, and threw me out like I was nothing. To him, it was victory. To me, it was only the beginning, because behind that boardroom game was Arthur Vance, the company's founder. He knew Richard was rotting the empire from the inside out, and he needed a pawn to set his plan in motion. I chose to be that pawn, letting my humiliation become the fuse. Richard thinks he destroyed me, but in truth, he only triggered the trap already buried beneath his feet. He stole my reputation, my career, my faith, everything. And because I have nothing left to lose, I now have the power to take it all back. The Miami skyline was a liar. From my office on the 45th floor of the Vance Sterling Tower, it promised infinite possibility, a shimmering mirage of glass and steel under a relentless Florida sun. But inside these walls, possibility had a ceiling, and its name was Richard Thorne. He was the CEO of Vance Sterling Properties, and I was his director of strategy, a title that for the past 6 months felt more like chief obstacle. The Azure Cove project is a game changer, Richard announced, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile boardroom. He gestured toward a glossy 3D rendering of a luxury condominium complex that looked like it had been surgically removed from Dubai and carelessly dropped onto a fragile stretch of Miami coastline. It's bold. It's aggressive. It's exactly the kind of high-impact development that will get Wall Street excited again. I kept my expression neutral, my hands clasped loosely around a pen I had no intention of using. Across the polished mahogany table, David Chen, our chief financial officer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. David was a man made of numbers and caution, and Richard's boldness gave him a permanent case of indigestion. Next to Richard, Liam Carter, a junior VP with the ambition of a shark and the spine of a jellyfish, nodded so vigorously I worried his head might come loose. "With all due respect, Richard," I began, my voice calm and measured. This was a carefully rehearsed dance. My team's projections show a significant risk. The environmental impact assessments are borderline, the zoning permits are far from guaranteed, and the market for hyper-luxury units is showing signs of saturation. Richard's smile, a flash of unnaturally white teeth, didn't reach his eyes. "Sophia, your team's job is to analyze risk, I get it. My job is to take it. That's why I'm in this chair." He leaned forward, his expensive tie brushing against a stack of papers. Vance Sterling didn't become a titan of industry by being timid. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He invoked the name of our founder, Arthur Vance, a man who built this empire on a foundation of shrewd calculation and unwavering integrity, qualities Richard Thorne possessed in the same quantity as a desert has snow. Arthur was a legend. Richard was the son-in-law of a major board member, a man who had climbed the corporate ladder with boots made of privilege and entitlement. "I'm not suggesting timidity," I countered, sliding a single-page summary across the table. "I'm suggesting prudence. The data indicates that a mixed-use development, focusing on sustainable commercial and residential spaces in the Wynwood district, offers a higher probability of long-term return with a fraction of the capital risk." Liam Carter scoffed audibly. "Wynwood, we're a luxury brand, Sophia, not a charity for starving artists. The starving artists have made Wynwood one of the most desirable and rapidly appreciating districts in the country," I said, not taking my eyes off Richard. "The money is there, we just have to be smart enough to see it." Richard glanced at my summary for less than a second before pushing it aside. "Your proposal is safe, it's boring. Azure Cove is a legacy project, my legacy project." He clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and final. "We're moving forward with Azure Cove. David, I want the initial capital request drafted by end of day. Liam, coordinate with marketing. Let's get a press release ready." The meeting was over, just like that. Months of my team's work of meticulous research and data modeling dismissed in favor of a CEO's vanity project. As the others filed out, Richard gestured for me to stay. "Close the door," he said, his friendly boardroom mask dissolving. I did as he asked, the heavy glass door clicking shut, sealing us in. "What was that, Sophia?" he asked, his voice low and hard. "You deliberately tried to undermine me in front of my team." "I presented a data-driven alternative, Richard. That's my job." "Your job is to develop strategies that support my vision," he snapped, rounding the table to stand directly in front of me. He was taller than me, a fact he always used to his advantage, trying to intimidate. My vision, not yours. You've been a thorn in my side since I took over. Always questioning, always pushing back. You seem to have forgotten who runs this company now. I've never forgotten, I said, my gaze steady. I just remember the principles this company was built on. Arthur Vance always said, risk without reason is just gambling with other people's money. His face darkened at the mention of Arthur's name. Arthur Vance is a retired old man playing golf in Palm Beach. His folksy wisdom doesn't apply to the modern market. This is my company now, and if you can't get on board with my agenda, maybe you don't belong here. It wasn't a question. It was a threat, clear and simple. I had been expecting it. I understand, I said softly. He seemed surprised by my lack of fight. Good, I'm glad we're on the same page. Now I expect your full support on Azure Cove. No more alternative proposals. Understood? Understood. I walked out of that boardroom feeling a cold, hard knot of resolve tighten in my stomach. Richard thought he had won. He thought he had put me in my place. He had no idea what game was really being played. That evening, I drove away from the glittering tower and headed for a quiet, old-world hotel bar downtown. The kind of place with dark wood, low lighting, and bartenders who knew how to make a perfect old-fashioned without asking. He was already there, sitting in a secluded booth, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Arthur Vance looked every bit the retired tycoon. Silver hair, a face etched with the lines of 1,000 deals made and won, and eyes that, even at 75, were as sharp and discerning as a hawk's. He hadn't played a round of golf in years. He's getting reckless, I said as I slid into the booth opposite him. Arthur took a slow sip of his drink. Reckless is Richard's natural state. It's his defining characteristic. Right after overconfident and incompetent, did he push the Azure Cove project through? He steamrolled it, dismissed my Wynwood proposal without a second glance, and he threatened my job. Again. Arthur sighed, a deep, weary sound. I knew he would. He's running the company into the ground, Sophia. Leveraging our assets for his pet projects, alienating our best people. He's treating my life's work like his personal piggy bank. The board is too complacent, too dazzled by his charisma to see the rot spreading underneath. So, we're still moving forward? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. More than ever, Arthur said, his eyes hardening. The plan is in motion. Julian Croft is ready. Julian Croft was the CEO of Croft Enterprises, our biggest competitor. For the past year, the media had been painting a dramatic picture of a corporate war between Vance Sterling and Croft. What they didn't know was that Julian and Arthur were old friends, their rivalry a carefully constructed piece of theater. He's preparing the offer, Arthur continued. It will be low, insultingly low, just enough to be credible as a hostile takeover attempt, but low enough that any sane board would reject it outright. But Richard isn't sane. He's arrogant. He'll see it as a personal attack. And he'll overreact, I finished for him. He'll issue panic statements, try to rush the Azure Cove deal to show strength, and the market will smell his fear. The stock will take a hit. Exactly, Arthur confirmed. That's when our consortium of silent partners, loyalists who believe in what this company should be, will start buying. We buy the dip. We acquire a controlling interest quietly, piece by piece. The scale of the plan was breathtaking. It was audacious, dangerous, and brilliant. We were going to use Richard's own ego to orchestrate his downfall. But there was one crucial piece, one trigger that would set the entire chain reaction in motion. He needs a scapegoat, I said, the words tasting like ash. When the takeover bid goes public and the stock starts to slide, he'll need someone to blame for the company's perceived weakness. Arthur's gaze was heavy with a mix of regret and steely resolve. He'll blame you, Sophia. He'll find a reason. He'll claim you were disloyal, that you weakened the company from the inside, making us a target. He'll fire me. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that word hanging between us. My career, my reputation, my entire professional life, all to be sacrificed as the opening gambit in this high-stakes chess match. All my communications with Julian have been through encrypted channels, as we planned, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. But I'll need to make one call from a company line. Something that can be traced, something that looks incriminating. It has to be convincing, Arthur warned. He'll have you investigated. He'll tear your life apart looking for a reason. I know. I took a deep breath, the air in the bar suddenly feeling thin. Let him look. This is for more than just a job, it's for the soul of the company. Arthur reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His grip was firm, reassuring. You are the best strategist I have ever worked with, Sophia. Better than I ever was. When this is over, the company will be in the right hands. Your hands. The next 2 days were a blur of manufactured tension. I deliberately let my frustration with the Azure Cove project show, engaging in a heated but professional argument with Liam Carter in a public hallway. I left my Winwood proposal on the printer for anyone to see. And then, I made the call. I sat in my office late one evening, knowing the company's servers logged every call made after hours. I dialed the number for Julian Croft's private line. "Julian, it's Sophia Brown," I said, my voice low and conspiratorial. "Yes, no, I can't talk long. Did you review the materials I sent? Good. The vulnerabilities are exactly where I indicated. The internal leadership is distracted. Yes, the timing is perfect. They won't see it coming. Let me know when you're ready to make your move." I hung up. It was done. The bait was set. It didn't take long for the shark to bite. The following afternoon, Richard's assistant summoned me to his office. Her eyes were filled with a pity I didn't need. When I walked in, Richard was standing by his panoramic window, staring out at the city. Liam Carter was there too, standing beside the desk, looking like a smug vulture. On the desk was a single sheet of paper, a transcript of my phone call. "Sophia," Richard began, his voice dripping with false sorrow. "I'm so disappointed. I treated you like a key member of my team, and this is how you repay me, colluding with our fiercest competitor." "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, feigning confusion and outrage. Liam tapped the paper. "We do. We have the phone logs. You've been feeding information to Julian Croft. You've been helping him plot a takeover. It's treason, Sophia." "This is absurd," I said, my voice rising. "That call is being taken completely out of context. I would never betray this company." Richard turned from the window, his face a mask of cold fury. "Save it. I don't know what Croft promised you, but your time here is over. You're fired, Sophia, effective immediately." He gestured to 2 security guards who had appeared at the door. "They will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. Then they will escort you out of this building. You are not to speak to anyone on your way out." Liam smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his face. "Don't worry, Sophia. I'll take good care of your office." The walk back to my office was the longest of my life. Every head turned. Every whisper felt like a physical blow. The security guard stood impassively as I packed my life into a small cardboard box, a photo of my family, a few books, a framed print of an old Miami map. It was a humiliating, soul-crushing ritual designed to break a person. As I walked through the lobby, clutching the box, I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. I kept my head held high, my face a carefully constructed mask of dignified shock. But inside, my heart was pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm. This was it. The first pawn had been sacrificed. Richard Thorne thought he had ended my career. He thought he had cut out the cancer and secured his throne. He had no idea he'd just fired the starting pistol on a war he had already lost. The automatic glass doors of the Vance Sterling Tower slid shut behind me with a soft, final hiss. Out on the bustling Miami street, the humid air hit me like a physical blow, thick and heavy. The city's symphony, the blare of horns, the distant thrum of a speedboat, the cacophony of multiple languages, felt alien and overwhelming. For 12 years, that tower had been my world. I had walked through those doors as a junior analyst with big ideas and an oversized blazer, and I had just been ejected as a traitor with her life in a cardboard box. My hands were shaking. I set the box down on a marble planter and fumbled in my purse for my car keys, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The humiliation was a hot flush crawling up my neck. I could still feel the stares, the whispers. Sophia Brown, the golden girl, the strategic prodigy, frog marched out of the building like a common criminal. The performance had been perfect. Too perfect. A part of me, the part that had poured its soul into that company, was genuinely wounded. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah Jenkins, my senior strategist, my right hand, and one of the brightest minds I'd ever had the pleasure of mentoring. I ignored it. I couldn't speak to her, not yet. I couldn't lie to her, and I couldn't tell her the truth. I drove aimlessly for a while, the sleek, modern architecture of Brickell giving way to the vibrant, chaotic energy of Little Havana. I found a small Cuban coffee shop, a ventanita, and ordered a cortadito. The tiny cup of intensely sweet, potent coffee scalded my tongue and jolted my senses. Leaning against the counter, surrounded by the rapid-fire chatter of Spanish, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the day. Richard's smug face, Liam's predatory smile, the pity in the eyes of my colleagues. It was all fuel. The hurt, the anger, the shame, I packed it all away, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of purpose in my chest. This wasn't just business. Richard had made it personal. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an encrypted messaging app. The sender ID was simply Phase 1 complete. Are you all right? I typed back, my fingers steady now. Better than ever. Just needed some coffee. What's the word from inside? David Chen tried to speak with Richard, argued that firing you without a more thorough investigation sends a message of instability. Richard told him that harboring sympathy for traitors was a career-limiting move. Liam Carter is already measuring my old office for new furniture. A grim smile touched my lips. Predictable. Richard was isolating anyone who showed a glimmer of independent thought, surrounding himself with sycophants like Liam. Good, I typed. Let him think he's consolidating power. He's actually building his own echo chamber. When does Julian make his move? Tomorrow morning, 9:31 a.m., 1 minute after the market opens. Brace yourself, Sophia. The storm is about to hit. The next morning, I was in the small, temporary office Arthur had arranged for me, a nondescript space in a building miles from the financial district. It was equipped with a bank of monitors, secure communication lines, and a top-of-the-line espresso machine. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, believed that corporate warfare required excellent coffee. At 9:30 a.m., the market opened. The ticker for Vance Sterling Properties, VSB, glowed green, trading steadily at a respectable $68 a share. At precisely 9:31 a.m., the news alert hit the wire. Croft Enterprises makes unsolicited bid to acquire Vance Sterling Properties in hostile takeover attempt. On the screen, our stock symbol froze for a second, then turned blood red. VSB, $62, down 6 points in the blink of an eye. And so it begins, Arthur said, walking into the room with 2 cups of coffee. He hadn't bothered with a suit, dressed instead in a comfortable polo shirt and slacks, looking more like a chess grandmaster than a corporate raider. The offer is for $65 a share, I said, reading the details flashing across the screen. It's a lowball, just as we planned, high enough to be taken seriously, but below its current trading value. It's an insult. It's a precision-guided missile aimed directly at Richard Thorne's ego, Arthur corrected me. Now we watch the show. The show did not disappoint. By noon, Richard had called an emergency all-hands meeting. Thanks to Sarah, who was live texting me from the auditorium, I had a play-by-play. He's on stage now, Sarah's text read. Looks furious. Liam is standing behind him like a Secret Service agent. What's he saying? I typed back. This is not a takeover bid. It is a pathetic, opportunistic act of corporate piracy by a man who lacks the vision and courage to build something of his own. He's attacking Julian Croft personally. Arthur chuckled from his chair. Rookie mistake. Never make it about the man, always the numbers. He's talking about you now, Sophia. The next text came in. Oh, this is bad. Tell me. This cowardly attack was made possible by a snake we harbored in our own house. Sophia Brown, a disgruntled employee whose failed ideas were rejected, chose to sell out this company, to sell out all of you for her own bitter revenge. Let me be clear. The weakness she exposed has been excised. We are stronger, more unified, and more determined than ever. I closed my eyes for a moment. I knew it was coming, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. He was painting me as the villain, the sole reason for the company's vulnerability. What's the mood in the room? I asked Sarah. Scared, people are whispering, no one is clapping. David Chen looks like he's going to be sick. That was the reaction we needed. Fear, uncertainty, doubt. Richard thought he was projecting strength, but he was projecting panic, and the employees could see it. The market could see it too. By the end of the day, VSB had closed at $59 a share. We had lost nearly 15% of our value in 7 hours. That evening, I finally took Sarah's call. Sophia, I don't believe a word of it, she said, her voice a fierce whisper. None of us on the team do. What he did to you was disgusting. That man is a tyrant. Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know, I said, the sincerity in her voice a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. But I need you to be careful. You're my eyes and ears now. Don't do anything that puts you at risk. Liam Carter is already trying to take credit for the Wynwood project, she said with a snort of disgust. Presented your entire slide deck to Richard this afternoon, just changed the name on the cover page. Richard called it visionary. Of course he did, I sighed. Listen, Sarah, I need you to keep an eye on the Azure Cove financing. David Chen will be under immense pressure to push that through, to show the board they're still moving forward. I need to know every document he signs, every dollar that gets allocated. I can do that. My friend works in David's department. We can be discreet. Good. Stay safe, Sarah. Hanging up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Arthur and me anymore. It was about Sarah and David, and the hundreds of other employees whose careers and livelihoods were being gambled away by an incompetent egomaniac. The next few days were a brutal slog. The financial news channels were in a feeding frenzy. Pundits and analysts debated the takeover, and my name was dragged through the mud repeatedly. I was the disgraced strategist, the corporate Matahari. I stopped watching. I focused on the only screen that mattered, the one showing VSB's stock price. It continued to fall. 57, 55. Richard, as predicted, doubled down. He issued a series of aggressive, ill-advised press releases, refusing to engage with Croft's offer, and instead announcing that Vance Sterling was fast-tracking the Azure Cove project, calling it a monument to the company's unshakable future. It was the single dumbest move he could have made. The market saw it for what it was, a desperate, high-risk gamble. The stock plunged to 51. That was the signal. Arthur made a series of encrypted calls. From London, from Zurich, from Tokyo. Our silent partners, a network of retired executives, private equity funds, and old money families who owed their fortunes to Arthur's guidance, began to move. They weren't buying in massive, headline-grabbing blocks. They were buying in thousands of smaller, anonymous transactions flowing through a dozen different brokerage firms. It was a subtle, steady absorption of shares, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. My job was to coordinate the acquisitions. I sat at the center of the web, monitoring the market volume, directing our partners when to buy, when to hold, ensuring our collective purchases never triggered SEC alarms. We were sharks, circling a bleeding animal but moving with the silent grace of a school of fish. By the end of the week, VSB was hovering at a dismal $48 a share. The financial world saw a company in a death spiral. We saw a fire sale, and we were buying. "We have 15%, I announced to Arthur, staring at the complex spreadsheet that tracked our acquisitions. "Another week of this, and we'll have 30. Arthur looked out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Richard, going to call a board meeting? He's going to have to. He'll try to push through a poison pill, some defensive measure to make the company too expensive for Croft to acquire. And the board will approve it," I said. "They're running scared." "Let them," Arthur said with a cunning smile. "Let Richard build his fortress walls as high as he wants. He's forgotten one very important thing." "What's that?" "We're not trying to break down the gates from the outside," he said, turning to look at me, his eyes gleaming. "We're already inside." The call came late at night, a scrambled number that I knew belonged to Sarah. I answered on the first ring. "He's losing it, Sophia," she said, her voice a strained whisper, the sound of her own breathing loud in the background. She was probably hiding in a stairwell. "The pressure is getting to him. He's been in closed-door meetings all day, shouting. People are avoiding making eye contact with him." "What about David Chen?" I asked, my pen hovering over a notepad. "Is he holding up?" "Barely. Richard is pushing him to liquidate some of our smaller, stable assets to free up cash for Azure Cove. He wants to project an image of financial strength, but David knows it's like selling your lifeboats to buy a bigger chandelier. I had coffee with him this afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week." She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "He told me Richard is demanding revised profit projections for Azure Cove, projections that are optimistic to the point of being fiction. He's asking David to sign off on numbers he knows are lies. And if he doesn't?" Richard implied that David's loyalty was under review. "He knows David has a mortgage and 2 kids in college. He's squeezing him, Sophia, hard." My grip tightened on the pen. David Chen was a decent man, a man of integrity. He was exactly the kind of employee Richard was destroying. "And Liam?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Liam is thriving. He's a parasite that feeds on chaos. He's been parading around, calling himself the acting head of strategy. He took your Winwood files and has been trying to pass the idea off as his own, but he's already butchering it. He doesn't understand the nuance, the phased rollout, the community partnerships. He just sees the land value. He's turning your surgical strike into a sledgehammer." "Let him," I said, a cold spark of an idea beginning to form. "Let him think he's a genius. The higher he climbs, the further he has to fall. Sarah, keep a close eye on David. He's the key. If Richard forces his hand, David might be the ally we need on the inside." "I will," she promised. "Be careful, Sophia." The next day, Arthur and I watched as the official notice for an emergency board meeting was issued. "The poison pill," Arthur said, reading the agenda on his tablet. "He's going to ask the board to authorize a shareholder rights plan." "It's a classic defense," I acknowledged. "If Croft or anyone acquires a certain percentage of stock, say 15%, It triggers a provision allowing all other shareholders to buy additional shares at a steep discount. It floods the market with new stock, diluting the acquirer's stake and making the takeover prohibitively expensive. It also hurts the company, Arthur said grimly. It's a scorched earth tactic. He'd rather poison the well than let anyone else drink from it, but the board is panicking. They'll see it as a strong defensive move. They'll approve it. And when they do, our window to acquire shares at a low price will get more complicated, I said, mapping out the potential consequences on a whiteboard. True, but Richard is making another mistake, Arthur said, a familiar glint in his eye. He thinks the battle is for the stock. The real battle, Sophia, is for the boardroom. We don't need to own 51% of the company on the open market. We just need to own the hearts and minds of the people who already have a seat at the table. Right now, he has their fear. We need to give them a reason to have faith. The board meeting was held 2 days later. The news broke just before lunch. As Arthur predicted, the board had unanimously approved Richard's poison pill. They also authorized a massive executive retention bonus package for Richard and his senior leadership team, a golden parachute designed to reward them for their own failure. It was a brazen act of self-preservation disguised as corporate strategy. The market's reaction was immediate and brutal. Investors saw the move for what it was, a sign of a desperate, entrenched management team willing to destroy shareholder value to save their own skins. The stock, which had stabilized around 49, nosedived. 45, 43. By the close of trading, VSB was at a catastrophic $41 a share. In our secret office, there was no panic. There was only quiet, focused activity. They've handed us a gift, I said, watching the flurry of buy orders our partners were executing. He just put the entire company on a clearance sale. He thinks he's built a wall, Arthur said, looking at the stock price with a grim satisfaction. All he's done is lock himself inside with the people who are about to realize he's the reason the building is on fire. While our consortium quietly amassed another 5% of the company at rock-bottom prices, I initiated the next phase of my own plan. I called Sarah. It's time to help Liam, I said. There was a confused silence on the other end. Help Liam? Sophia, I'd rather help a scorpion put its shoes on. I know, but I need you to be his biggest supporter, I instructed. He's trying to present the Wynwood project to the board's planning committee next week, right? Yes, he's in way over his head. The numbers aren't adding up because he doesn't understand the model. Exactly, so I need you to anonymously leave a folder on his desk. It'll contain some of my old preliminary financial models for the project. Just the top-line numbers, not the underlying data or the strategic partnerships that make those numbers possible. It will look like a roadmap to success. You're giving him your work? Sarah asked, sounding aghast. I'm giving him a loaded gun with the safety off, I corrected her. He's too arrogant to question the numbers and too stupid to understand them. He'll present them to the committee as his own. He'll look like a hero for a day. But those numbers are dependent on a series of delicate negotiations with community leaders and local businesses, negotiations that only I have the relationships to close. So when the committee asks him for the details, Sarah began, the understanding dawning in her voice. He'll have nothing. He'll fall apart. He'll expose himself as a fraud, and by extension, he'll expose Richard's catastrophic lack of judgment in promoting him. We're not just attacking Richard's strategy, we're attacking his credibility as a leader. It was a risky move. It meant letting my own hard work be stolen and potentially misrepresented, but it was a necessary sacrifice. Richard had taken my career. I was going to take his reputation. While Liam was busy preparing his stolen presentation, I made another call. This one was to a journalist named Olivia Vance, no relation to Arthur, but a happy coincidence. Olivia was a sharp, tenacious reporter for the Wall Street Journal who had been following the VSB saga. I had been a confidential source for her on background stories for years, building a relationship based on mutual trust. Olivia, it's Sophia Brown. Sophia, she said, her voice immediately alert. I've been leaving you messages. The things they're saying about you, I have a feeling there's more to this story. There is, I said, and I'm not ready to tell my side of it yet, but I have a tip for you. Vance Sterling's new acting head of strategy, Liam Carter, is about to present a major new project to the board. It's a development in the Wynwood district. Interesting, she said. Moving away from the high-risk luxury condos? Exactly. It's a brilliant strategy, focusing on sustainable, mixed-use development, community-integrated, high-tech infrastructure. It has the potential to be the most profitable and forward-thinking project in the company's history. I gave her the broad strokes, the vision, the potential that I had poured my soul into creating. "It sounds impressive," Olivia said, and I could hear her typing furiously. "It sounds like something you would have designed." "I'm just telling you what I'm hearing," I said, maintaining the pretense. "The question you should be asking, Olivia, is whether the current leadership has the experience and the detailed knowledge to actually execute a plan this complex. A vision is one thing, execution is everything." I gave her just enough to pique her interest, to frame the narrative. When Liam presented his stolen, hollowed-out version of the plan, Olivia would be watching, and she would see the cracks. She would see the difference between a real strategy and a cheap imitation. I hung up the phone, feeling the familiar adrenaline rush of a plan clicking into place. Richard was holed up in his fortress, counting on his poison pill and golden parachutes. He was fighting a war of finance. He had no idea I had just opened up a new front, a war of information, and in that arena, he was hopelessly outmatched. The day of Liam Carter's presentation to the board's planning committee felt like the prelude to a controlled demolition. I sat in our command center with Arthur, a live audio feed of the boardroom patched through a secure line, a courtesy of a sympathetic IT tech who owed Arthur a decades-old favor. Olivia Vance, I knew, was waiting in the lobby of the Vance Sterling Tower, ready to ambush committee members for a quote the moment they stepped out. The stage was set. "Thank you for joining me, esteemed members of the committee," Liam's voice crackled through the speaker, oozing a manufactured confidence that set my teeth on edge. "Today, I'm not just here to present a project. I'm here to unveil a new vision for Vance Sterling, a vision I call Winwood Ascend." Arthur snorted into his coffee. "Winwood Ascend? The boy has all the creative flair of a beige carpet. He's following the roadmap, Arthur." "Just listen," I urged, my eyes fixed on the financial models spread across my desk. Liam launched into the presentation, and I had to give him credit. He was a convincing parrot. He recited the top-line numbers from the files I'd given him with gusto. He spoke of projected revenue streams, community engagement, and sustainable design, using all the right buzzwords in a beautifully designed slideshow that Sarah had told me he'd outsourced to a freelance designer for a small fortune. "As you can see," he announced grandly, "Winwood Ascend is projected to deliver a 35% return on investment within the first 5 years, far exceeding the returns on any of our current luxury-focused projects." I could hear the impressed murmurs from the committee members. They were old-guard real estate developers, men who understood profit margins better than they understood their own children. Liam was speaking their language. Then came the voice of reason, the voice of our unwitting ally, Margaret Ellison. She was a long-serving board member, a shrewd, no-nonsense woman in her late 60s who had started her career in construction management. She didn't suffer fools gladly. "An impressive projection, Mr. Carter." Margaret's voice cut through the air, sharp and precise. "I'm particularly interested in your cost analysis for the repurposed warehouse conversions. You've projected a construction cost that is nearly 20% below the current market rate for that kind of specialized, high-tech refit. How do you intend to achieve those savings?" The line went silent for a beat. I could almost picture Liam's smug smile faltering, his eyes darting through his notes for an answer that wasn't there. "Well, Mrs. Ellison," he stammered, we have secured aggressive bids from our primary contractors. Efficiency is key. Our synergy." "Synergy is not a building material, Mr. Carter," Margaret retorted, her voice dry. "I'm asking for specifics. Which contractors? Have you signed letters of intent? Have you factored in the rising costs of steel and specialized labor for historic retrofitting?" Another painful silence. "Those details," Liam finally managed, his voice now a few octaves higher, "are being finalized by my operational team." "I see," Margaret said, and in those 2 words she conveyed a universe of doubt. "And what about the community partnerships you mentioned? You've based a significant portion of your revenue model on leasing ground-floor commercial space to local artisans and tech startups. Have you secured any pre-lease agreements? What community leaders have you spoken to?" This was the kill shot. The entire financial viability of the Winwood project rested on the trust and cooperation of the local community, a network I had spent 2 years carefully cultivating. "We have had numerous positive outreach meetings," Liam floundered, the desperation now palpable. "There's a great deal of enthusiasm, a groundswell of support. Name one," Margaret said simply. "Name one community leader who has formally endorsed this project as you've presented it today." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the speaker, I could hear the shuffling of papers, a nervous cough. Liam was imploding. He had walked into a gunfight armed with a beautifully printed brochure. The rest of the meeting was a slow, agonizing dissection. The committee members, led by Margaret, picked apart his hollow presentation piece by piece, exposing his complete lack of substance. By the end, the tone in the room had shifted from impressed to openly contemptuous. An hour later, Olivia Vance's article hit the web. The headline was devastating. Vance Sterling's new strategy stumbles as visionary Wynwood project lacks substance. The article quoted an anonymous committee member, undoubtedly Margaret, who said, "You can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of buzzwords." It painted a brutal picture of an unprepared executive, long on ambition and short on details. And because Olivia had framed the project's potential so brilliantly beforehand, Liam's failure seemed all the more catastrophic. He hadn't just failed, he had fumbled the company's best hope for a comeback. The fallout was immediate. The stock, which had been weakly trying to rally, dipped again, but more importantly, the narrative had changed. The problem at Vance Sterling was no longer just an external threat from a competitor, it was an internal crisis of competence. The next morning, I received a text from Sarah. "David Chen wants to meet you. Tonight, off the record." This was it. The moment the cracks began to show on the inside. I met David at a dimly lit jazz bar in Coral Gables, a place far removed from the power lunch spots of the financial district. He looked haggard, his suit rumpled, a glass of untouched whiskey sweating on the table in front of him. "Thank you for coming, Sophia," he said, his voice low. He kept glancing around nervously, as if Richard Thorne might materialize from the shadows. "Of course, David. What's going on?" He took a long, shaky breath. "Richard is forcing me to sign off on the Azure Cove financing tomorrow. He's found a lender, a private equity firm known for predatory terms, willing to fund the project, but the interest rates are criminal. It'll cripple our cash flow for the next decade. And the projections he's making me attach to the loan application, Sophia, they're fraudulent." He looked down at his hands. "I've been with this company for 25 years. Arthur Vance hired me himself. I believe in this place. But I can't do this. I can't attach my name to a lie that will sink this company." "Then don't," I said gently. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice cracking. "He'll fire me. He'll ruin my reputation. I have a family, Sophia. My son's final tuition payment is due next month." I reached into my bag and slid a plain manila envelope across the table. "I think I can help with that." He looked at the envelope, then at me, his eyes wide with suspicion. "What is this?" "It's a solution. Arthur Vance set up an independent trust years ago for employees facing hardship. It's completely confidential. Inside that envelope is a cashier's check that will cover your son's tuition for the next 2 years. There are no strings attached. It's not a bribe, David. It's a safety net. A thank you for 25 years of loyal service." Tears welled in his eyes as he opened the envelope and stared at the check. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, leaning forward. "Just do the right thing. Richard is asking you to choose between your integrity and your family. We're giving you a way to keep both. Don't sign the loan documents, David, but don't just refuse. I need you to do something else." I spent the next 20 minutes laying out the plan. It was simple, direct, and it would require more courage than David had ever had to summon in his professional life. He listened intently, his expression shifting from fear to a dawning, steely resolve. The man who had walked into the bar looking broken was slowly being replaced by the man of principle Arthur Vance had hired all those years ago. "He'll destroy me," David whispered when I was finished. "He will try," I said, "but he won't succeed, because you won't be standing alone." He looked at the check, then back at me, a long moment passing between us. Finally, he nodded, a single, firm motion. "Okay, I'll do it." The next day, Richard Thorne convened a meeting with the company's top lenders and legal team to finalize the Azure Cove financing. He was expecting a simple signing ceremony, a press release-ready moment to project strength. He got something else entirely. David Chen walked into the meeting, but instead of the signed loan application, he handed Richard his letter of resignation. And he didn't stop there. He also handed a copy of the letter and a detailed, confidential memo outlining the fraudulent projections and predatory loan terms to every single person in the room. He had detonated a truth bomb in the heart of Richard's war room. The news of the CFO's abrupt resignation and the accusations of financial fraud hit the street like a tsunami. All hell broke loose. Trading of VSB was halted. The SEC announced an immediate inquiry. Richard was trapped. His fortress had become his prison, and the walls were closing in fast. The fallout from David Chen's resignation was a corporate mushroom cloud. The SEC inquiry, the halted stock, the panicked calls from lenders, it was a perfect storm of Richard's own making, and he was at the epicenter. His strategy of projecting strength had backfired spectacularly, revealing a foundation of lies and desperation. From our quiet command center, Arthur and I watched the chaos unfold with a grim sense of validation. David had been safely extracted, his family temporarily relocated to a quiet condo in the Keys, courtesy of Arthur's trust. He was a hero, but in Richard's eyes, he was the ultimate traitor, even worse than me. "He's cornered," Arthur observed, swirling the ice in his glass of water. "A cornered animal is a dangerous one. He's going to lash out. He'll try to find someone else to blame." He was right. The next morning, a vicious internal memo, which was inevitably leaked to the press within the hour, circulated through the company. In it, Richard blamed the entire crisis on a coordinated campaign of sabotage, led by me and a cabal of disgruntled former employees, a clear reference to David. He portrayed himself as the victim, the steadfast captain trying to steer the ship through a hurricane stirred up by mutineers. It was a desperate, transparent ploy, and it only made him look weaker. But it also put me directly in the crosshairs. My phone lit up with calls from reporters, legal analysts, even a few opportunistic lawyers looking to represent me. I ignored them all. My fight wasn't in the court of public opinion, not yet. The real battle was happening behind the closed doors of the boardroom. The board of directors, who had been placated by Richard's charisma and poison pill, were now in a full-blown panic. Their personal liability was on the line. The SEC doesn't take kindly to boards that look the other way on financial fraud. That's when Arthur made his move. He didn't call a meeting. He requested a series of private, one-on-one lunches with key board members. He started with Margaret Ellison. "Margaret is the linchpin," he told me as he prepared for their meeting at an exclusive, old-school steakhouse. "She's the board's moral compass. If she turns, the others will follow." I spent the morning briefing him, providing him with a meticulously organized portfolio. It contained the truth about the Wynwood project, my full, unadulterated strategy, including the letters of support I had already secured from community leaders. It also contained a detailed analysis showing how Richard's Azure Cove project, even with the most optimistic projections, would have led the company to a net loss within 3 years. It was a dossier of competence versus incompetence, of vision versus vanity. Arthur returned from the lunch with a quiet smile. "Margaret and I had a very productive conversation about the future of the construction industry," he said, which was his coded way of saying, "She's on our side." He met with 2 more board members the next day, a retired banker named George and a tech entrepreneur named Maria. To each, he presented the same calm, rational case. He never once attacked Richard personally. He simply laid out the facts, the numbers, the irrefutable data that showed the current CEO was not just failing, but actively damaging the company they were all sworn to protect. He wasn't asking for their loyalty. He was appealing to their fiduciary duty. While Arthur was winning the hearts and minds, I focused on the final, critical piece of our plan, the numbers. Our consortium had been steadily acquiring shares, and with the stock price in the gutter, we had managed to amass a staggering 40% of the company. It was an unprecedented feat of covert acquisition. We were the single largest shareholder, and no one on the board, least of all Richard, knew it. The time had come to reveal our hand. "It's time for the shareholders to speak," Arthur said to me one afternoon, a week after David's resignation. "It's time for an extraordinary general meeting." As a significant shareholder, Arthur had the right to formally petition the board to call a meeting of all shareholders for a specific purpose. Our purpose was simple and brutal: a vote of no confidence in the CEO, Richard Thorne, and a motion to remove him from the board. The petition was a declaration of war. Richard could no longer hide behind memos or blame former employees. He would have to face his shareholders, and he would have to do it knowing that his 2 signature projects, Azure Cove and Wynwood Ascend, were now smoking craters. The board, under pressure from Margaret and the others Arthur had swayed, had no choice but to schedule the meeting. It was set for 10 days later in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel. The days leading up to the EGM were the most intense yet. Richard and his remaining allies launched a frantic campaign to rally support. They called every major institutional investor, promising, pleading, and spinning a narrative of a company under siege from hostile outside forces. Our campaign was the opposite. It was quiet, targeted, and devastatingly effective. I worked the phones, speaking not to the fund managers, but to the analysts, the number crunchers who reported to them. I didn't talk about Richard's personality or my own firing. I walked them step by step through the financials. I showed them the math on Azure Cove. I showed them the detailed, viable, and now publicly vetted potential of the real Winwood strategy. I spoke their language. It was a campaign fought not with rhetoric but with spreadsheets. The night before the meeting, my own team, the strategy group I had built, reached out. Sarah acted as their spokesperson. "We're all resigning tomorrow morning, Sophia," she said, her voice firm. "In a group, an hour before the meeting. We're releasing a joint statement to the press saying we cannot, in good conscience, continue to work under the current leadership. We stand with you and with David Chen." I was stunned. "Sarah, no, that's too much of a risk for all of you. What if this doesn't work?" "Then we go down with the ship we believe in," she said simply. "But it will work, because you're leading it. We've all got your back." I hung up the phone, a lump in my throat. This had started as a cold, calculated corporate chess match, a plan to reclaim a company. But it had become something more. It had become a movement, a quiet rebellion of competent, honorable people against a corrupt and inept leader. The morning of the meeting, the ballroom was electric with tension. It was the first time I had been in the same room with Richard since he'd fired me. I walked in with Arthur, taking a seat in the front row, directly in his line of sight. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. He had thought he'd gotten rid of me. He was just now realizing that my firing wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. He took the stage, looking pale and strained under the bright lights. He launched into a prepared speech, a rambling, defensive tirade about loyalty and vision and fighting off corporate raiders. He was trying to command the room, but he had already lost it. The news of my entire strategy department resigning en masse had ripped through the financial world that morning. It was the final, devastating blow to his credibility. Then it was Arthur's turn. He didn't take the stage. He walked to a simple microphone on the floor. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke calmly, as if addressing a small group of trusted colleagues. "I founded this company 40 years ago with a simple principle," he began. "Build things that last, build them with integrity. And most importantly, put the company in the hands of people who are smarter and more capable than you are." He paused, and his eyes found mine in the front row. "For the past year, we have failed that principle. We have prioritized ego over excellence. We have silenced data in favor of delusion. We are here today not because of a hostile takeover, but because of a crisis of leadership from within." He then laid out the case, calmly and methodically, presenting the facts. He concluded, "The motion on the floor is to remove Mr. Richard Thorne as CEO and as a member of the board. But that is only half the solution. A company is not just a stock price, it is a vision for the future. And for that, we need a new leader. A leader with a proven strategy, with the respect of her team, and with the unwavering integrity this company was built on. Therefore, following the vote, I will be nominating Ms. Sophia Brown as the new Chief Executive Officer of Vance Sterling Properties." A collective gasp went through the room. Richard's face went from pale to ashen. He was being dethroned and replaced in a single, breathtaking maneuver. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the full scope of his defeat finally dawning on him. He had thought he was fighting a corporate raider named Julian Croft. He had been so focused on the enemy at the gates that he never realized the real threat was the woman he had kicked out the front door. The vote was called. It wasn't even close. The institutional investors, armed with my data, voted with us. Margaret, George, and Maria led the board's defection, and our own silent 40% provided the unshakable foundation. Richard Thorne was removed by a staggering 87% majority. The room erupted. Not in wild applause, but in a wave of palpable relief, the collective exhale of a company that had been holding its breath for a year. I looked at Sarah and my team, who were standing in the back, and they were beaming. I looked at Arthur, who gave me a slow, proud nod. The war was over. The battle for the soul of the company had been won. Now, the real work, the work of rebuilding, was about to begin. The gavel fell, but the sound was swallowed by the cavernous ballroom, lost in the sudden, sharp intake of 100 collective breaths. For a moment, there was absolute silence, a vacuum where the future of Vance Sterling Properties was being rewritten. Richard stood on the stage, frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning on a clear, sunny day. Arthur placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Go on," he murmured, his voice full of a quiet, profound pride. It's your company now. Walking toward that stage was the most surreal experience of my life. Every eye in the room was on me. I saw friends, former colleagues, rivals, and strangers. I saw hope in some faces, shock in others, and in a few, the dawning, fearful respect of those who had underestimated me. As I approached the steps to the podium, Richard was being ushered off by a tight-lipped board member. Our paths crossed for a final, fleeting second. There was no fury left in his eyes. There was only a hollow, echoing emptiness. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind the brittle shell of a man. "You," he whispered, the word barely audible, a puff of air filled with a year's worth of venom. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. "It was never about you, Richard," I said, my voice low and calm. "It was about the work. You just happened to be in the way." I didn't wait for a response. I continued up the steps and stood at the podium where he had just stood. The microphone was still warm. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the shareholders, the board members, and standing in the back, my team. My loyal, brilliant, brave team, their faces shining with triumphant relief. I took a breath, letting the moment settle. This wasn't a time for a prepared corporate speech. It was a time for the truth. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent room. "My name is Sophia Brown, and I am honored to accept the responsibility you have entrusted me with today. We have just closed a difficult and painful chapter in this company's history. A chapter defined by uncertainty and fear. That chapter is now over." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Our new chapter will be defined by 3 simple principles. First, integrity. We will be transparent in our dealings and honest in our numbers. We will never again ask our employees to compromise their principles for profit. Second, competence. Our decisions will be driven by data, by strategy, and by a deep understanding of the markets we serve, not by ego or vanity. And third, respect. Respect for our employees, respect for our partners, and respect for the communities we build in." My eyes found David Chen, who had quietly slipped into the room and was standing beside Sarah. "Our first official act will be to reinstate Mr. David Chen as Chief Financial Officer, with our deepest apologies for the treatment he endured." A wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause broke out, the first real sound to fill the room since the vote. David simply nodded, his face a mask of profound, quiet gratitude. "There is a great deal of work to be done," I concluded. "We have to rebuild trust, with our investors, with our partners, and most importantly, with each other. It will not happen overnight, but it will happen, starting right now. Thank you." It was short, it was direct, it was a promise. The walk back into the Vance Sterling Tower an hour later was a world away from the walk of shame when I'd been escorted out. The security guard at the front desk, a man I'd nodded to 1,000 times, broke into a wide grin. "Welcome back, Ms. Brown," he said, his voice full of genuine warmth. "It's good to have you home." As Arthur and I crossed the lobby, something incredible happened. An analyst from the 3rd floor started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire cavernous marble lobby was filled with applause. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of a boardroom. It was the sound of liberation. People leaned out of their office doorways, clapping, smiling, giving thumbs up. They weren't just clapping for me. They were clapping for themselves, for the end of a toxic era. My first destination wasn't the sprawling CEO suite on the 45th floor. It was my old office, the one Liam Carter had so eagerly claimed. We arrived to find him in the middle of frantically packing his things into a box, his movements clumsy and panicked. He froze when he saw me standing in the doorway, flanked by Arthur and a stern-faced head of HR. "Sophia, Ms. Brown," he stammered, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. I was just congratulating you in an email. I'm a team player. I've always believed in your vision. The Wynwood project, that was all." "Stop, Liam," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't anger. It was nothing. He was an irrelevant footnote. "Your services are no longer required at this company. HR will now escort you from the building. Your personal effects will be couriered to you." "But I have my own projects, my ideas," he pleaded, his bravado crumbling into pathetic desperation. "No," I said, the word as cold and hard as steel. "You had my projects, and you were not qualified to handle them. We are building a culture of competence and integrity now. You possess neither. Goodbye, Liam." I didn't watch him leave. I turned to Sarah, David, and the rest of my strategy team who had gathered in the hallway. Their faces were a mixture of joy and exhaustion. "Welcome back, everyone," I said, a real smile finally breaking through. "Let's go home." We walked into our old strategy department, my office, our war room. It felt sacred. For the next hour, we didn't talk about stock prices or strategy. We talked about the past few weeks. We celebrated David's courage. We toasted the bravery of the entire team. It was a moment of shared victory, a moment to decompress and reconnect as a team that had been through a war together. Finally, David cleared his throat. "So, boss," he said, the word boss now holding a completely new weight. "What's the first move?" The energy in the room shifted, the celebration giving way to a familiar, focused hum. This was what we were built for. "First, you and I are going to call our lenders," I said to David. "We're going to kill the Azure Cove financing and begin the process of repairing the relationships Richard fractured. Second, Sarah, I want you to re-engage with our community partners in Wynwood. Immediately. Tell them the original, authentic plan is back on the table. Third, I want a full, transparent audit of every project Liam Carter touched. We need to assess the damage." I looked around at their faces, eager, energized, ready. "And fourth," I said, "I want everyone to go home at 5 o'clock tonight. Go have dinner with your families. This is a marathon, not a sprint. The culture of burnout ends today." Later that afternoon, I finally made my way up to the 45th floor. Richard's office, my office, was vast and impersonal, filled with oversized furniture and ostentatious art. It felt cold, sterile, a monument to a man's ego. The only thing of value was the view. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the Miami skyline, the same skyline that had once seemed like a liar. Now it looked like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. My phone buzzed. It was a news alert. VSB stock surges 40% in afternoon trading following ousting of Thorne, appointment of Brown as CEO. Wall Street cheers return to competent leadership. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Arthur. "How does it feel?" he asked, coming to stand beside me at the window. "Heavy," I admitted. "The view is the same, but the responsibility is immense." "You've earned it," he said. "You didn't just win a company, Sophia. You inspired a quiet revolution. You reminded people that it's okay to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He pointed down at the city. Richard looked at this and saw a reflection of his own ambition. All he wanted to do was put his name on it. You look at it and you see the details. The communities, the connections, the potential. You see how to build things that last. "I learned from the best," I said, turning to him with a grateful smile. "No," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Now you are the best. My work is done. It's your ship to steer." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and one more thing, I had this sent up." He gestured to a corner of the office. A large, framed map was leaning against the wall. It was an old, antique map of Miami, a copy of the one I'd had in my old office, the one I'd taken home in my box of shame. "Every leader needs a map," Arthur said, "to remember where they came from and to chart where they're going." He left, closing the door softly behind him. I was alone in the quiet, cavernous office with the city sprawling at my feet and a map of the past to guide the future. The war was over. The company was mine. The real work, the work of building, had just begun. The first 6 months were a whirlwind of relentless, focused rebuilding. The work was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhaustion that feels deeply satisfying, like the ache in your muscles after building something with your own hands. We weren't just managing a company. We were performing a corporate exorcism, casting out the ghosts of Richard's toxic regime and replacing them with a culture of transparency and collaboration. Our first order of business was triage. The audit of Richard's and Liam's projects revealed a mess of half-baked deals, bloated budgets, and alienated partners. We spent weeks untangling the knots, terminating disastrous contracts, and making apologetic phone calls. It was humbling work, cleaning up someone else's mess, but it was necessary. With every problem we solved, we could feel the foundation of the company getting a little bit stronger. The Wynwood Ascend project, now restored to its original name, the Wynwood Collective, became the symbol of our new era. Sarah and I personally led the community meetings. We didn't show up with glossy presentations and empty promises. We showed up with blueprints and listening ears. We met with artists in their studios, with chefs in their restaurants, with tech entrepreneurs in their co-working spaces. We asked them what they needed, what they feared, and what they dreamed of for their neighborhood. Their input reshaped the project in subtle but profound ways, making it not just a development we were imposing on a community, but a partnership we were building with it. When we finally broke ground, it wasn't with a row of anonymous executives in hard hats. It was with the community leaders, the artists, and the small business owners standing shoulder to shoulder with us. Inside the company, the change was just as palpable. I made a point of walking the floors every single day. I learned people's names, asked about their projects, and held open-door office hours where any employee, from a janitor to a VP, could come and speak to me directly. We re-established the company's tuition reimbursement program that Richard had cut. We invested in new technology and training. We made it clear that our most valuable assets weren't our buildings, but our people. The result was a quiet but powerful transformation. The fear that had permeated the hallways was replaced by a buzz of creative energy. People started sharing ideas again, collaborating across departments, taking risks. We were becoming the company I always knew we could be: innovative, agile, and driven by a shared sense of purpose. About 8 months into my tenure as CEO, Julian Croft came to our office. The man who had played the role of corporate villain so convincingly walked into our conference room with a warm smile and a bottle of ridiculously expensive champagne. "To the smoothest hostile takeover that never was," he said, raising a glass. "You, Sophia, are a terrifyingly brilliant strategist. I'm just glad you're on my side." "We couldn't have done it without you, Julian," I said, clinking my glass against his. "Your performance was Oscar-worthy." "Well, Arthur Vance is a hard man to say no to," he laughed. "And besides, seeing Richard Thorne get what he deserved was payment enough. The man was a cancer on this city's business community." Our old rivalry, once a piece of carefully constructed theater, was now evolving into a genuine partnership. We announced a joint venture between Vance Sterling and Croft Enterprises, a landmark project to develop affordable, sustainable housing in an underserved part of the city. It was a deal that would generate real profits, but more importantly, it would make a real difference. It was the kind of deal Richard, with his obsession for luxury and legacy, would never have even considered. And what of Richard? After his ousting, he had vanished from the Miami business scene. The SEC inquiry had ended in a hefty fine and a formal censure for his misleading financial statements, making him effectively unemployable in any public company. I heard through the grapevine that his wife's family, embarrassed by the scandal, had quietly cut him off. The last I heard, he was trying to launch a small-scale real estate consultancy in another state, a diminished king ruling over a kingdom of nothing. His legacy wasn't the shimmering Azure Cove, which we had since sold off to a more responsible developer. His legacy was a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about what happens when ego eclipses integrity. One afternoon, I was looking over the final architectural plans for the first building in the Wynwood Collective when my assistant told me I had a visitor. It was Arthur. He walked in, not with the air of a founder or a mentor, but with the simple, proud smile of a friend. "I was just taking a walk," he said, which I knew was his excuse for checking in. "It's a beautiful day." "It is," I said, gesturing for him to come look at the plans. "Look at this. The solar panel integration is even more efficient than we projected, and the public green space, the community design committee came up with that." He looked at the detailed drawings, at the notes in the margins from dozens of different collaborators. He wasn't just looking at a building. He was looking at a process. He was looking at a culture. "You did it, Sophia," he said softly. "You didn't just save the company, you made it better than it ever was. You built something that will last." Looking back on that whole chaotic, terrifying, and ultimately transformative experience, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about corporate strategy or financial maneuvering. It was about people. It was about the quiet courage of a man like David Chen, who was willing to risk everything for his principles. It was about the fierce loyalty of a team like mine, who stood together when it would have been easier to stand aside. And it was about the profound truth that you can't build anything of value on a foundation of lies. Vindictive leaders like Richard Thorne ultimately fail because they believe they are the center of the universe. They see employees as pawns to be moved, rules as obstacles to be circumvented, and truth as a flexible commodity. They build their empires on fear and intimidation, but fear is a brittle foundation. It cannot withstand the steady, collective pressure of people united by integrity and a shared belief in a better way. Our story is a testament to that. We didn't win with a hostile takeover. We won with a quiet revolution, a hostile takeover of principles. We proved that the most powerful weapon in any boardroom isn't a controlling share, but a compelling vision. We showed that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy, but building something better in their place. So if you find yourself in a situation where your voice is being silenced, where your integrity is being tested, where you feel like a pawn in someone else's game, remember this. A single voice of truth can be more powerful than a chorus of lies. A small act of courage can inspire a rebellion. And a well-executed plan, built on a foundation of competence and respect, can topple even the most entrenched of tyrants. Don't just fight back against the culture you're in. Build the culture you believe in. Because in the end, the only legacy that truly lasts is the one you build with integrity, brick by honest brick.